For most of human history, rockets were fireworks, not in the pejorative sense, in the literal economic sense. You built the rocket, you fueled it, you launched it, and when it had done its job, it fell into the ocean or burned up in the atmosphere and was gone forever. Every launch required an entirely new vehicle. Every component, the engines, the fuel tanks, the avionics, the structural members, was used once and discarded. This was not an oversight, it was not laziness or lack of imagination. The engineers who built the Saturn V and the Space Shuttle and the Atlas and Delta rockets were among the most talented people in the world. They understood the economics. They understood, abstractly, that reusability would be transformative if it could be achieved. The Space Shuttle had been designed, in part, around the idea of reusability. Its main engines were recovered and reused. Its solid rocket boosters were fished out of the ocean and refurbished. Its orbiter was flown multiple times. But the shuttle demonstrated, expensively, that reusability as achieved was not the same as reusability as imagined. The cost per kilogram to low Earth orbit on the Space Shuttle was, by most estimates, higher than on the expendable rockets it was supposed to replace. The refurbishment required between flights was so extensive, the thermal protection system alone required tens of thousands of hours of inspection and repair, that the economics never approached the original projections. When SpaceX began seriously pursuing rocket reusability in the early 2010s, the established aerospace industry's consensus was polite skepticism at best. The hard part wasn't the concept. The hard part was making it work in a way that actually reduced costs rather than simply moving them around. What SpaceX did next changed the economics of space access more fundamentally than anything since the Saturn V. To understand why reusability is so transformative when it actually works, consider the economics of any other vehicle type. A Boeing 737 costs approximately $100 million to manufacture. Over its operational life, it might fly 50,000 flights, carrying passengers on each one. The amortized cost of the airframe per flight, the portion of the manufacturing cost attributed to each individual trip, is roughly $2,000. The fuel, crew, maintenance, and airport costs dominate the operating economics. The airframe cost is manageable. Now imagine if airlines operated the way rocket companies did before SpaceX. Every 737 flight ends with the aircraft crashing into the Atlantic Ocean. The airline builds a new plane for the next flight. The $100 million manufacturing cost is attributed entirely to one flight. That flight becomes almost unimaginably expensive. This is the economics of expendable rocketry. The Falcon 9 rocket costs approximately $60 million to manufacture. If it is expended on every flight, $60 million is a fixed cost of every launch, before fuel, before operations, before anything else. If the booster can be recovered and reflown, that $60 million manufacturing cost is distributed across however many times the booster flies. The amortized manufacturing cost per flight drops dramatically, and with it, the total cost of reaching orbit. The catch is that recovery and refurbishment are not free. The recovery operation requires fuel, propellant reserve for the landing burn, infrastructure, and engineering overhead. Inspection and refurbishment between flights cost money and time. If these costs approach or exceed the manufacturing savings, the economics of reusability don't close. SpaceX's achievement was making the costs close, and then making them close better and better with each iteration. The path to the Falcon 9's first booster landing in December 2015 was not a straight line. It was a decade of incremental development, spectacular failures, and a risk tolerance that was genuinely unlike anything the established aerospace industry practiced. SpaceX was founded by Elon Musk in 2002 with the stated goal of making humanity multiplanetary. The company's first rocket, the Falcon 1, was a small two-stage vehicle designed to demonstrate that a private company could reach orbit at a fraction of the cost of established launch providers. The first three Falcon 1 launch attempts in 2006, 2007, and 2008 all failed. The third failure, in August 2008, was particularly painful. It carried commercial and NASA payloads and was lost shortly after what appeared to be a successful first stage separation when the stages unexpectedly collided. By the time of that third failure, SpaceX had spent most of its initial capital. Musk had invested his entire PayPal fortune into the company. He later described the period as the darkest of his professional life. The company had enough resources for approximately one more launch attempt. The fourth Falcon 1 launch in September 2008 succeeded. It was the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit. The company survived. The aerospace industry's traditional approach, extensive analysis, exhaustive ground testing, conservative design margins, acceptance of long development timelines in the interest of minimizing flight failures, was the product of a specific context. Government programs where political accountability made public failures devastating, and where cost plus contracting meant that slower development didn't threaten the program's survival. SpaceX operated in a different context with different constraints and developed different norms accordingly. The development of Falcon 9 reusability proceeded through a program called Grasshopper and later the Falcon 9 Reusable Development Vehicle, a series of test vehicles that practiced vertical takeoff and landing at low altitudes before the technology was applied to an orbital class booster. The drone ship landings, which SpaceX attempted beginning in early 2015, produced several failures before the first success. The landing attempts were public. SpaceX live-streamed them, including the failures. Drone ship footage showed boosters arriving slightly off-center and tipping over. A booster that ran out of hydraulic fluid for its grid fins tumbled. A booster that landed successfully but hit the deck hard enough that one leg collapsed and the vehicle fell. Each failure was analyzed, the cause identified, and the fix implemented before the next attempt. The public visibility of the failures was itself unusual for an aerospace company. The industry norm was to keep test failures private, and it served multiple purposes. It demonstrated that SpaceX was actually attempting what it said it was attempting. It built public engagement with the program, and it created accountability. The failures were on record, the fixes were on record, and the eventual successes were unambiguous. On December 21, 2015, Falcon 9 Flight 20 launched a batch of Orbcomm satellites to low Earth orbit. After stage separation, the first stage booster performed a series of burns to decelerate and reorient, descended to Cape Canaveral, and landed vertically on the Landing Zone 1 pad with its landing legs deployed. The landing was clean, precise, and complete. It was the first time an orbital-class rocket booster had returned from space and landed propulsively for recovery. The SpaceX control room erupted. The reaction was genuine. Engineers who had worked on the problem for years watching it work for the first time. The footage circulated globally. 4 months later, in April 2016, SpaceX landed its first booster on a drone ship at sea. The more difficult achievement required for high-energy missions where the booster lacks sufficient propellant to return to the launch site. The first reflight of a recovered booster, using a booster that had already flown once, occurred in March 2017. This was the step that closed the economic argument for reusability. Landing a booster was an engineering achievement. Relaunching it was a demonstration that the economics actually worked. The reflight of booster B10021, which had originally flown a CRS-8 mission to the International Space Station in April 2016, was treated by Musk as more significant than the original landing. The landing proved reusability was possible. The reflight proved it was practical. The progression from that first reflight to SpaceX's current operational cadence illustrates how dramatically the technology matured. In 2017, a reflown booster was a novelty. By 2020, all commercial Falcon 9 launches use previously flown boosters as a matter of routine. By 2022, individual boosters were being flown 10, 12, 14 times. Booster B1060 flew 14 times between 2020 and 2023. The number of times a booster can be reflown with manageable refurbishment has expanded with each iteration of the refurbishment process. The cost implications have been significant. SpaceX has not published detailed cost accounting. The company is private and does not disclose economics at that level. But the trajectory of Falcon 9 launch pricing provides evidence. Falcon 9 commercial launch prices have declined substantially in real terms since the rocket's introduction, even as the company has remained profitable on launch services. The reusability savings are being partially passed to customers and partially retained as margin, allowing SpaceX to invest in the next generation of development. The competitive implications for the broader launch market have been severe. United Launch Alliance, Boeing and Lockheed Martin's joint venture that had previously dominated US government launches with the Atlas V and Delta IV rockets, found its pricing model under existential pressure. Arianespace, the European launch provider whose Ariane 5 rocket had been the global commercial launch market leader before Falcon 9's rise, saw its market share decline sharply. Both organizations began developing next-generation vehicles with reusability as a core requirement. Development programs that would not have existed or would have proceeded at a fraction of their current pace without SpaceX's competitive pressure. Falcon Heavy, the more powerful variant of the Falcon 9 system using a cluster of 3 Falcon 9 boosters, demonstrated the scalability of the reusability approach when it launched in February 2018. The test flight, which carried Musk's personal Tesla Roadster as payload in a piece of theater that generated global coverage, recovered both side boosters in a simultaneous synchronized landing at Cape Canaveral. The two boosters descended in parallel, their landing burns igniting at the same moment, touching down in near-perfect synchronization. The footage is genuinely extraordinary. The Falcon Heavy landing was not just a spectacle, it demonstrated that the recovery systems could be reliably executed simultaneously without interference for multiple boosters on a single mission, extending the reusability model to heavy lift configurations. The Starship development program, conducted at SpaceX's Starbase facility in Boca Chica, Texas, has proceeded in exactly the manner SpaceX's culture would predict: rapid iteration, public testing, high-profile failures followed by public analysis and redesign, and a relentless push toward the next test before conventional aerospace timelines would consider it appropriate. Multiple full-scale Starship prototypes were tested between 2020 and 2021 in a series of high-altitude test flights that produced spectacular explosions on landing attempts before prototype SN15 achieved the first successful high-altitude flight and landing in May 2021. The explosions were streamed live. SpaceX described them as rapid, unscheduled disassemblies, a phrase that became a widely cited example of the company's cultural approach to failure. The first orbital test flight of the fully stacked Starship and Super Heavy system occurred in April 2023, launching from Starbase. The vehicle achieved liftoff and cleared the launch pad, an achievement in itself as SpaceX had been uncertain whether the ground support infrastructure could handle the rocket's 33 Raptor engines firing simultaneously, before experiencing multiple engine failures, losing vehicle control, and being terminated by the flight safety system approximately 4 minutes after launch. The pad infrastructure was significantly damaged. The second integrated flight test, in November 2023, performed substantially better. The vehicle reached space before losing communication during the upper stage's planned fuel venting test. The third test, in March 2024, achieved the first successful stage separation, the first successful re-entry of the Starship upper stage, and significant progress on Super Heavy booster recovery before both vehicles were lost. By the fourth test, in June 2024, both the Super Heavy booster and the Starship vehicle survived re-entry and achieved controlled splashdowns, demonstrating that the thermal protection and flight control systems for re-entry were functioning. The progression across 4 tests in approximately 14 months, from pad damage and early termination to controlled re-entry of both stages, illustrated the iteration speed that SpaceX's risk tolerance enables. A conventional aerospace program might have spent the same 14 months in analysis and redesign before the second test flight. SpaceX flew 4 times, learned from each flight, and arrived at a substantially more capable vehicle. The risk tolerance question deserves examination rather than simply celebration. SpaceX's approach to risk is not universally applicable and has real costs. The Starship test program has faced regulatory scrutiny from the Federal Aviation Administration over its licensing process and environmental impact. The April 2023 launch damaged the launch pad extensively and scattered concrete debris over a wide area, raising questions about the adequacy of the pre-launch analysis of ground effects. The FAA grounded Starship after the first test pending a mishap investigation and license modification review, a process that took several months. The environmental impact of Starbase's operations in a sensitive coastal ecosystem in South Texas has been a subject of litigation and regulatory dispute, with environmental groups raising concerns about the impact on wildlife, particularly migratory birds and sea turtles. The workers who build and operate SpaceX's facilities work under conditions that, by some accounts, reflect the same high-pressure, high-hours culture that Tesla's factory workforce experienced during production hell, with similar mixed assessments of whether the intensity reflects inspiring mission-driven culture or unsustainable labor practices. These are not reasons to dismiss SpaceX's achievements. They are context for understanding that the risk tolerance and operational pace that enable rapid development have distributional consequences, that the costs of moving fast are not borne uniformly by those who benefit from the speed. What SpaceX has actually accomplished, what the Falcon 9's booster recovery program has changed permanently, is the baseline assumption of the launch industry. Before SpaceX, expendable rockets were the default and reusability was an aspiration. After SpaceX, reusability is the expected trajectory for any serious launch vehicle development program. Every major new rocket under development, ULA's Vulcan, Blue Origin's New Glenn, Rocket Lab's Neutron, Europe's Ariane 6 successor programs, is either reusable or being designed with a path toward reusability. The economics SpaceX demonstrated have made the previous baseline economically indefensible for anyone trying to compete. The cost of reaching low Earth orbit has declined substantially in real terms since the Falcon 9's introduction, and the trajectory continues downward as reuse frequency increases and Starship development progresses. This declining cost is not just commercially significant, it is the enabling condition for a range of space activities, commercial, scientific, governmental, and eventually human settlement, that were previously constrained by the expense of getting to orbit. The fireworks model of rocketry is ending. It is ending because a company founded by someone who made his money in internet payments decided that rockets should work more like airplanes and was willing to fail publicly and repeatedly and at great expense until they did. The boosters come back now. They land on their tails like science fiction promised they would. And the cost of getting to space, for the first time in the history of the industry, is actually going down.